Clayton Rivers never expected to bury his boots back in the dusty soil of western Missouri. But when the letter came, certified, thick with legal papers, and an old key taped inside, he knew exactly what it meant. His grandfather, Samuel Rivers, had passed, and with his death came the inheritance of a 127-acre patch of land that had been in their family since 1894. The land was once a working cattle ranch, then a modest retreat for Vietnam vets, and most recently, just the quiet place old Sam kept to himself, while the rest of the town slowly sold out to developers, tech money weekenders, and a homeowners association that had started with paved roads and ended with armed code enforcers. The HOA, called Clearwater Preserve Estates, had begun modestly, with little flyers about shared responsibilities and neighborhood unity. But over the last decade it had transformed into a corporate-feeling entity with a private security contractor, a 5-member board with unchecked power, and a ruthless leader named Bethany Drake, a woman known for her crisp white blazers, silent smiles, and courtroom wins that left families homeless. When Clayton returned, he brought nothing but a duffel bag, a worn Stetson, and his grandfather's old revolver, still wrapped in a cloth, with the initials, Senior, stitched in blue. The cabin was still there, perched just west of the creek that divided his land from the now paved Phase 3 development of Clearwater. Everything looked the same, except for the new iron gate at the eastern edge of the property, complete with security cameras and a shiny plaque that read, Clearwater Preserve, Border Protection Zone, no entry without HOA compliance. Clayton snorted. Sam Rivers had warned him about this in letters. They want the spring, Clay, he'd written. They say it's theirs because of runoff, because of some survey they got changed. They got the board to vote on it when no one was watching. But you and I know that spring's been in our family longer than Clearwater's ever had a name. The spring in question wasn't just water. It was pure, natural, and rumored to have therapeutic properties. That, plus its location, made it a prime target for developers looking to build a luxury spa extension to the HOA's newly constructed wellness district. They needed that spring, and they were used to getting what they wanted. The day after Clayton arrived, a letter was nailed to his fence post, not placed, nailed with cold, efficient staples. Notice of violation, unregistered occupancy, non-HOA structure present, non-compliant perimeter fencing. Clayton read it while sipping black coffee, shirtless in the early morning light, his dog, Jasper, lying under the porch swing. He folded it once, walked over to the fire pit, and burned it without a word. But he knew what this was. The start of pressure. The start of a war. Over the next few weeks, Clayton saw them watching. First, it was HOA board member Leonard Price pretending to jog by the creek in compression shorts and mirrored glasses, pausing just long enough to check the fence line. Then it was routine maintenance crews from the HOA inspecting nearby roads that hadn't needed repair in decades. Finally, a drone, quiet, black, hovering just above treeline, appeared for 2 days straight, until Clayton shot it down with rock salt and dropped the wreckage in a UPS box marked return to sender. But he wasn't just reacting. Clayton had been in the Army Corps of Engineers for 16 years. He knew how to secure a perimeter, how to build counter-surveillance traps, how to document everything with timestamps, sensors, and trail cams. Hidden in natural wood, he mapped the property with military precision, created backups of every legal document, and installed his own solar-powered antenna tower to ensure uninterrupted data flow. Jasper, his dog, became his scout, alerting him to every foreign scent or distant engine. It didn't take long for the escalation. A sheriff's deputy arrived on a Thursday morning, eyes apologetic but firm, holding an order that demanded Clayton cease unauthorized use of groundwater resources. It was laughable. The spring wasn't even plumbed, just a natural flow that bubbled into a stone basin. Samuel Rivers had reinforced with concrete back in '76. Clayton refused to sign anything. He cited state land and water rights laws, referenced pages of legal precedent, and sent the deputy back with a polite but firm message. Tell your client if they want to fight, they better bring more than forms and fake bylaws. The next week, power to his well pump was mysteriously shut off. 2 days later, the county accidentally flagged his address as inactive, temporarily suspending his mail. Clayton knew the playbook: inconvenience, isolation, intimidation. But what they didn't know was that Samuel Rivers hadn't just left behind land, He'd left behind records, years of maps, journal entries, recorded meetings with county officials, and a binder labeled, "If They Come." In it were copies of every transaction the Rivers family had made with the original county, including hand-drawn surveys, notarized by a federal land clerk in 1912. More importantly, there were photos, one of which clearly showed the original Clearwater boundary, ending 15 feet short of the spring. Clayton scanned everything, uploaded it to a cloud server, and sent copies to 3 different attorneys, one of whom specialized in rural property rights and owed Clayton a favor from back in Afghanistan. But he didn't stop there. He set bait, a small, fake violation marker near the north fence, a fake camera mounted at the wrong angle. He let the HOA send their people to correct it, and when they did, when they stepped 6 feet over the legal line, Clayton caught it, on every angle, video, thermal, GPS tagged. They had trespassed, and not just once. He let them build confidence, let them believe he was on the back foot, and then, just before the quarterly HOA meeting, he released a 12-minute video montage, edited with time-stamped clips, drone footage, of their own surveillance paths, and legal overlays of every violation they'd committed. He uploaded it to a private link, and sent it to every resident of Clearwater with the subject line, "Who's really violating who?" What followed was panic. 3 board members resigned in 48 hours. Leonard Price deleted his HOA Facebook group. Bethany Drake, she doubled down, filed a civil suit, claimed Clayton falsified evidence, tried to get an emergency injunction to seize the spring until the matter could be resolved. But the judge, a nonsense woman from rural Arkansas with a reputation for hating bullies, not only threw out the injunction, she'll fine the HOA $50,000 for procedural abuse and violation of Clayton's Fourth Amendment rights. Beth's smile didn't look so polished in the courtroom that day. She looked rattled, like someone who'd finally realized the old man with the dog and the dusty boots wasn't just a stubborn recluse. He was a man who knew exactly how to fight back. Clayton didn't celebrate the courtroom win. He knew better. People like Bethany Drake didn't quit. They retreated, regrouped, and came back dirtier. And that's exactly what she did. Within a week of the judge's dismissal, Clayton's property was visited by a new inspector, this time from the State Environmental Quality Division. The man wore a clean vest, carried an iPad, and looked like he'd never stepped in mud before. He claimed there had been an anonymous complaint about contamination in the spring runoff, and said he needed to take soil and water samples. Clayton kept calm. He let the man do his job, even offered him a coffee. But he also filmed the entire visit with 2 trail cams and wore a button-sized mic on his flannel shirt. He noted when the inspector crossed the old creek line, another 6-foot trespass, and when he failed to seal the water vial properly before placing it in the cooler. Days later, a report arrived claiming high lead content and possible livestock waste infiltration. It was absurd. There were no livestock on the property, and the lead numbers were scientifically impossible given the surrounding terrain. Clayton had already anticipated the move. Before the inspector arrived, he'd taken his own samples and sent them to an independent lab in Kansas City, time-stamped and certified. When the HOA tried to use the faulty report to request another injunction, Clayton's attorney hit them with a fraud accusation so detailed it forced the county to open an inquiry into Clearwater's permitting history. That's when the real rot surfaced. A series of backroom rezoning approvals, shady easement purchases, and inflated contractor bids, all traced back to one company, Suncrest Consulting. Bethany Drake's husband was listed as CFO. The deeper they looked, the more cracks appeared. It turned out the wellness district was already $1.3 million over budget, and the HOA had been quietly charging extra infrastructure dues to homeowners under vague maintenance labels. Residents who had once ignored Clayton's emails were now forwarding documents, screenshots, even voicemails from board members pushing them to support emergency expansions. Clayton didn't just forward the files, he compiled them. He spent late nights building a digital evidence file so complete it could break the HOA apart. But even then, he wasn't looking to destroy, not yet. He gave them one last chance, a formal letter hand-delivered to the HOA board and the county council, stating that he would agree to negotiate limited access to the spring in exchange for full boundary recognition, restoration of power, apology for harassment, and the resignation of Bethany Drake. The response came 3 days later, not with words, but with fire. He smelled the smoke before he saw the orange glow. The eastern fence line, just past the old oak grove, had been set ablaze. It was a clear message. There had been no lightning, no hikers. The flames didn't spread far. Clayton had kept his brush trimmed and installed a sprinkler ring around the main structures. But it was arson. And this time, the HOA had crossed into criminal territory. Clayton called the fire chief directly, handed over video footage from his Southside cam, and waited. Within hours, authorities traced the movement of a white service truck leaving the HOA shed minutes before the fire started. The license plate, registered to Clearwater Maintenance, a subdivision of Suncrest Consulting. The sheriff's office issued a sealed warrant. Clayton said nothing publicly. Not yet. He went back to work, calm, focused. He knew what he was building now wasn't just a legal case. It was an event. A reckoning. Over the next week, he set up a live-stream camera rig near the spring, outfitted with solar backup and infrared for night footage. He updated the digital file with every new piece of evidence. And then, he sent invitations not to the but to the press, local media, independent reporters, environmental rights groups, property law bloggers. He gave them all secure access to a download link titled Clearwater Truth Archive. The leak went viral in under 48 hours. Within 3 days, #Clearwater Scam was trending in the Midwest. Homeowners who'd once been loyal to Bethany turned on her in real time. Videos of her previous depositions were clipped into young activists arrived at the gates of Clearwater with signs demanding transparency. And still, Clayton said nothing. He let the evidence speak. The breaking point came when Bethany, in an emergency HOA video call, tried to frame the fire as a natural occurrence and claimed Clayton's footage was deep-faked, but residents had seen enough. A vote was called an emergency leadership recall. She lost 91-4. Leonard Price tried to salvage order by proposing temporary leadership, but by then the county had opened a criminal fraud case against Suncrest and frozen all Clearwater HOA funds. Bethany was arrested 2 weeks later for obstruction, misuse of community funds, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Her mugshot was front page by Sunday morning. But even then, Clayton didn't leave the ridge. He kept the land, kept the spring, and when reporters finally asked him why he hadn't tried to sell or sue the HOA into the ground, he simply said, "This land doesn't belong to lawyers or boards. It belongs to families who bled for it." The spring ran clean that day. Quiet, cool, free, just like Samuel Rivers would have wanted. After the collapse of the Clearwater HOA and Bethany Drake's arrest, there was a strange silence in the valley. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a vacuum, and vacuums never last. The county sent in a transition manager, an older gentleman named Harold Deems, to maintain basic operations and untangle the HOA's web of overlapping accounts, unpaid invoices, and corrupted construction permits. Harold had seen his share of municipal disasters, but nothing quite like Clearwater. He met with Clayton on a drizzly Wednesday morning near the spring, notepad in hand, tie soaked through by the mist, and asked the question that had been whispered in town for weeks: "Why didn't you just sell, son?" Clayton stared at the clear water running over ancient stone and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he finally answered, "Because my grandfather didn't die here so someone could turn this place into a spa resort with valet parking." Deems chuckled once, then nodded. Fair enough, but not everyone had moved on. There were whispers that Bethany hadn't acted alone, that parts of the Clearwater development had been funded by our tough state investors who didn't care about zoning laws or local sentiment. Rumors about a man named Wade Trammell started surfacing, a private developer from Texas with a reputation for dirty acquisitions, forged easements, and well-paid silence. He was the kind of man who never left a paper trail but always had a lawyer in every county office. Clayton began receiving letters again, this time anonymous, typed, "No return address." One included an aerial photo of his cabin, circled in red ink. Another warned, "The spring doesn't belong to ghosts." Jasper started growling at night again. One evening, Clayton found tire tracks near the west fence line. Too fresh, too close. He didn't report it. He reinforced it. The cameras were doubled, the perimeter sensors upgraded, and Clayton began sleeping with the shortwave radio on, tuned to local chatter. Then came the land offer. A sleek black car rolled up his dirt road one morning, dust trailing like smoke. Behind it, A man in a navy suit stepped out, smiled like a billboard, and handed Clayton a leather folder. Inside was a check, 7 figures, and a non-disclosure agreement. No sender, no names, no handshake. Clayton said nothing. He folded the check, dropped it into the dog's water bucket, and closed the door. He didn't hear from the man again, but 2 days later, someone shot out the solar antenna. It happened just before midnight, one loud crack followed by the power flickering. Jasper barked until his voice went hoarse. Clayton didn't call the sheriff. He waited. The next night, he left the floodlights off. He stayed outside, armed, silent, watching. At 2:13 a.m., headlights appeared through the trees, low, crawling, no engine noise. Whoever it was, they'd cut the ignition and coasted in neutral, but they hadn't accounted for the sensor grid. As soon as they crossed the 3rd node, Clayton's silent alarm triggered. He raised his rifle, aimed to feet above the grill, and fired once into the air. The vehicle froze. For a full minute, nothing moved. Then the reverse lights blinked on, and the car rolled back into the woods. Clayton retrieved the shell casing, reviewed the footage, and called no one. Instead, he posted a still frame headlights caught in the trees, time-stamped and watermarked on a local online bulletin board, titled, "To whom it may concern, I see you." It worked. The threats stopped. But the pressure didn't. A month later, the county zoning board held a hearing. On the docket was a proposal to reclassify the land around Clearwater into a wellness economic development zone, a technical term that would allow eminent domain seizures in the public health interest. The wording was vague, buried in pages of jargon, but Clayton knew exactly what it meant. They were coming for the spring again, this time wearing government suits instead of HOA polo shirts. But Clayton wasn't the same man who'd arrived with a duffel bag and a bitter heart. He was a man with a full archive, legal allies, and hundreds of supporters who now trusted him more than their own leadership. He called in every favor, sent every file, and within 3 days of the proposal hitting the docket, the public comment portal exploded. Over 9,000 responses flooded in. Residents, activists, landowners, veterans, a legal team from the Property Defense Foundation filed an emergency injunction against the reclassification, and a petition reached 20,000 signatures in a week. The zoning board delayed the hearing, then rescheduled it, then cancelled it pending further review. Trammell's name surfaced in a leaked memo 2 weeks later, tied 2 shell companies, bidding on the future of the spring before it was ever up for sale. A state investigator was assigned. Clayton never smiled during any of it. He wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. What he wanted was the truth, locked into the soil, to protect it from becoming another casualty of greed disguised as progress. When the governor's office issued a press release confirming the termination of the wellness zone proposal and the initiation of a state-level audit into Clearwater's development history, Clayton simply sat on his porch, poured a whiskey, and scratched Jasper's ears. The wind rustled through the trees like a hymn, but just when it seemed over, one final envelope arrived, this one handwritten, postmarked from within the county. Inside was a photo. It was old, black and white. 3 men standing at the original spring, Samuel Rivers, a younger county surveyor, and a 3rd man whose face was mostly in shadow. On the back was written, "Some roots go deeper than water. Be ready." Clayton didn't recognize the handwriting, but he recognized the threat. He folded the photo, placed it next to his grandfather's medals, and waited not with fear, but with clarity. Because now it wasn't just about the land, it was about legacy. And legacy doesn't bend. It's carved in stone, held by calloused hands, guarded by those who refuse to forget where the blood settled first. The winter came faster than expected that year, blanketing the hills in a silence so thick even Jasper's bark felt muffled under it. Clayton chopped wood by hand, stacked it neatly against the cabin wall, and watched the steam rise from the spring every morning like it was exhaling some ancient wisdom. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to sleep past sunrise, to sip his coffee slowly, to believe it might finally be over. But peace, he'd learned, was never permanent, only paused. The first storm arrived with ice, bringing down to trees across the southern fence line. But when Clayton rode out to assess the damage, he found something else, a fresh set of boot prints, heavy, deliberate, circling the western edge of the spring. Whoever had come wasn't lost. They were looking. That night, Jasper wouldn't leave the porch, ears twitching, eyes on the dark. Clayton brought out the rifle again. He walked the perimeter like a soldier on patrol, every muscle taut, every footstep placed with memory-born caution. It felt like war, again, not bullets and orders, but waiting, watching, reading the shape of danger through silence. Then, just before dawn, the knock came. 3 hard raps on the cabin door. Clayton opened it to find a young woman, no older than soaked in freezing rain, her hands trembling as she held out a sealed envelope. "He said to give this to you directly," she whispered.